Dr. Velix had studied countless planets, healed hundreds of species, and faced emergencies that would break a lesser being. But nothing had prepared him for this. His medical transport had been en route to a distant colony when the alarm screamed, warning of an incoming attack. Pirates! Before he could react, explosions rocked the ship, and fire engulfed the control panels. The last thing he remembered was stumbling into an escape pod, frantically pressing controls, and watching through the viewport as the massive blue planet below grew larger and larger. Now, as the pod shuddered violently, the atmosphere tearing at its hull, Velix realized where he was about to land Earth. The one planet no sane alien ever wanted to set foot on. A death world. A place where everything the land, the air, the creatures wanted to kill you. The pod hit the ground hard, skidding through thick trees before slamming into a rocky hillside. Metal groaned, sparks flew, and the impact threw Velix against the restraints so forcefully he blacked out. When he came to, pain flooded his senses. His arm was broken, sharp agony radiating through his limb, and his head throbbed from the force of the crash. His environment suit was intact, but the display flickered with alerts, oxygen levels fluctuating, temperature unstable, biological threats detected in the air. He had to move. He had to get out before Earth itself finished what the pirates had started. Staggering from the wreckage, he took his first shaky steps on humanity's infamous homeworld. The gravity was heavier than what he was used to, pressing down on his already aching body. The air smelled dense, thick with moisture and the scent of unknown plant life. His suit's filters worked overtime, struggling to analyze the countless microscopic organisms swirling around him. This planet was alive in a way few others were. Too alive. His own world, Exelara, was sterile, controlled, predictable. Earth was chaos. Dark green foliage surrounded him, towering trees with twisted branches stretching toward the sky. The sun, an unforgiving yellow orb, burned hotter than his body could handle. Sweat gathered at his temples, making his suit damp despite the cooling system. His people were not built for this. His skin was too thin, his lungs too sensitive, his body too weak for a world so hostile. His broken arm throbbed, and he clenched his jaw, forcing himself to move. Staying by the wreckage was not an option if the fire didn't attract attention. The predators would. And Earth had predators. Something rustled in the undergrowth. Velix froze, his heart's hammering. His sensors detected movement several life forms, closing in. His mind raced through the limited knowledge he had of Earth's wildlife. Were they carnivorous? Did they hunt in packs? Could he outrun them? Another rustle, closer this time. His breath came in short gasps, his injured body already struggling to keep up. Then he saw them eyes in the shadows. The creatures moved swiftly, circling him, their forms hidden by dense vegetation. His translator struggled to match the sounds they made, but one thing was clear: they were hunting him. Panic clawed at his chest. He had no weapons, no way to defend himself. He reached for his emergency beacon. No help was coming. He was alone, on a planet that had never seen his kind before, facing creatures that viewed him as nothing more than prey. A sudden growl cut through the air, deep and menacing. A shape lunged. Velix barely had time to react before something fast and powerful tackled him to the ground. Pain flared as claws scraped against his suit, and for a terrifying moment. But just as quickly as the attack came, a deafening crack echoed through the trees, followed by a sharp yelp of pain. The weight on his chest lifted, and the creatures scattered, disappearing as fast as they had come. Dazed, Velix blinked up at the figure standing over him, a human. A female, her features partially obscured by the glare of the sun behind her. She held a weapon, smoke curling from its barrel, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither moved. Then she took a cautious step forward, lowering the weapon slightly but keeping her eyes locked on him. "You're not from around here," she said, her voice calm but edged with curiosity. Velix tried to respond, but exhaustion finally won. His vision blurred, his body too weak to fight anymore. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was the human kneeling beside him, her expression shifting from wariness to something else understanding. He had survived the crash. But surviving Earth? That was another battle entirely. Dr. Velix woke to unbearable pain, his entire body aching as if he had been trampled by a herd of beasts. For a moment, he had no idea where he was. Then the memories came rushing back: the crash, the predators, and the human who had saved him. He was still alive, but survival on Earth was proving to be a battle he wasn't built for. His species, the Exilari, were known for their intelligence and medical advancements, not their physical endurance. Earth, however, was a planet that did not care for intelligence. It was a world that demanded strength, resilience, and an unnatural ability to withstand suffering. And Velix had none of those. His broken arm throbbed, the pain radiating through his thin frame. His environment suit, designed to filter out alien bacteria, was struggling. The planet's air was filled with countless microscopic organisms that his immune system had never encountered. His filters were slowing them down, but not enough. A fever was already building in his body, and his head pounded with every heartbeat. His kind never got sick. Exilari worlds were sterile, controlled, free of natural diseases. Earth, on the other hand, was alive in the worst possible way. The human doctor, Emily Carter, as she had introduced herself, moved with a calm efficiency that unnerved him. She had dragged him to a small shelter made of primitive materials, though it seemed sturdy enough. He had expected hostility, interrogation, maybe even fear. Instead, she had treated his wounds without hesitation, using human medical supplies that were crude by Exilari standards, but surprisingly effective. She had injected something into his arm, explaining in clipped sentences that it would help fight off infection. Velix had tried to protest, but his body betrayed him, his strength fading too fast. His biology was different. What if human medicine made things worse? But there was no choice. His own medical kit had been lost in the crash, and his body was already failing. Even in his weakened state, he observed his surroundings with growing dread. The storm that had threatened earlier was now a full-force assault against the land, winds howling through the trees like vengeful spirits. Rain hammered against the shelter's walls, water seeping into the ground, turning solid earth into thick, clinging mud. Lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening crash of thunder. Velix flinched. His people did not live on planets like this. Solari worlds were engineered for comfort, with stable climates and predictable ecosystems. Earth was wild, untamed, and utterly merciless. The temperature fluctuated rapidly, one moment unbearably hot. The planet itself seemed to change moods like a living thing, shifting from one danger to another with no warning. It wasn't just the wildlife that wanted him dead. The very land, the air, the sky, all of it was an enemy. Emily, however, was unaffected. While Velix struggled to breathe, to stay conscious, she moved through the chaos with ease. She barely flinched at the thunder, barely reacted to the biting cold. Even when she stepped outside to secure the shelter, mud caking her boots, wind whipping at her hair, she remained steady. Velix could barely lift his head, yet this human acted as if nothing was wrong. It didn't make sense. How did they survive this? He had read about human stories of their endurance, their ability to live in environments that no other species could tolerate. He had assumed the reports were exaggerated. Now, he wasn't so sure. His suit's systems flickered again, struggling to compensate for his failing health. His fever was rising. The medicine she had given him was doing something. His body felt heavy, sluggish, his thoughts clouded. But worse than the fever was the realization that Earth was winning. Every breath felt like a battle, every movement an effort. His kind were not weak, but they were built for precision, not survival against impossible odds. This planet did not care. It did not care that he was a healer, that he had never harmed another being. It did not care that he had no quarrel with it. It only cared that he was weak, and weakness had no place here. Emily returned, shaking rain from her arms. She looked at him, eyes sharp, assessing. "You're not doing well," she said bluntly. "Your body's fighting everything. The air, the bacteria, even the food. You're not built for this place." Velix wanted to argue, to tell her that he had survived worse. He forced himself to sit up, ignoring the pain. How do your people survive here? His voice was hoarse, weaker than he wanted it to be. Emily gave a small, knowing smile. We don't survive it, she said. We fight it. Every day. Her gaze turned toward the storm outside, the endless chaos of the planet. We adapt or we die. That's the rule here. Velix let those words sink in. The Acceleri didn't adapt. They controlled. They built perfect worlds, perfect environments, removing danger rather than facing it. But humans, they faced it. They stood against storms, against predators, against disease. They suffered through it, endured it, and somehow kept going. It wasn't just that Earth was a death world. It was that humans had learned how to live in a place that should have killed them. Another shiver ran through him, not just from fever, but from understanding. He had thought Earth was a nightmare, but maybe it was something worse. Maybe it was a test. A place that rewarded only those who could keep going, no matter how much it tried to break them. And humans? They weren't just surviving it. They were thriving. Velix didn't know if he would live long enough to escape. But if he wanted to survive, truly survive, he couldn't rely on his technology, his knowledge, or his species' advancements. He had to learn from the ones who had already mastered the impossible. He had to learn from the humans. Dr. Velix's vision swam as he struggled to remain conscious. His body was failing. The fever burned through him like fire, his broken arm throbbed relentlessly, and his breathing had become shallow, every inhale a fight against the thick, contaminated air of this hostile world. Earth was relentless, an unyielding enemy that attacked him from all sides, its creatures, its atmosphere, even the microscopic organisms in the air. His body was never meant to withstand such an environment. His species, the Acceleri, were designed for precision, not endurance. He had dedicated his life to healing others, yet now he could do nothing to heal himself. His fate rested in the hands of the very beings he had been warned about: humans. Dr. Emily Carter moved around the shelter with quiet efficiency, her every motion precise, controlled. Velix watched her through half-lidded eyes, his mind clouded by fever, but his instincts screamed at him to remain alert. Was she truly a rescuer? Or had he simply fallen into another danger? Humans were unpredictable. Their species was known throughout the galaxy for its resilience, its intelligence, but also its ruthlessness. Reports describe them as both compassionate and terrifyingly violent, capable of acts of great kindness and unimaginable destruction. Which kind of human had found him? Emily knelt beside him, pressing a cool cloth to his burning forehead. The sensation was strange, an act of care on a world that had shown him nothing but hostility. You need to fight this, she said, her voice steady but edged with something he couldn't quite place. Concern? Determination? It was impossible to tell. Your body isn't built for this place, but you don't get to give up. There it was again, that strange human trait. The refusal to surrender. Even when logic dictated that survival was impossible, humans fought. Velix forced his lips to move, though his throat felt like sandpaper. Why are you helping me? It was a simple question, yet an important one. Her people had no reason to aid him. He was an outsider, an unknown. The smart choice would have been to leave him, to let Earth finish what it had started. Yet here she was, tending to his wounds, keeping him alive. Why? Because that's what we do, she said simply. We don't leave people to die. Not if we can help it. The answer unsettled him. In his world, survival was logical, calculated. Resources were not wasted on the weak. But humans? They defied that logic. They risked their own safety for the sake of another, even when there was nothing to gain. Was that kindness? Or was it something else? A sudden noise outside made her stiffen. The sound was subtle, a shift in the wind, a branch snapping, but it sent a jolt of alertness through her. Instantly, she grabbed the weapon resting beside her, her movements smooth and practiced. Velix tensed. Was she protecting him? Or was this the moment she turned against him? He had no energy to fight, no strength to defend himself if she decided he was a threat. Emily moved cautiously toward the entrance, pressing her back against the wall as she listened. The storm had passed, leaving behind a thick fog that curled through the trees outside, turning the world into a haze of shadows and half-seen figures. Something was out there, watching. Velix's breath caught in his throat. His sensors were too damaged to scan properly, but he didn't need them to sense the danger. The feeling of being hunted was unmistakable. He had felt it before, when the Earth predators had stalked him in the jungle. But this was different. This was not an animal. This was intelligent. Emily's grip on her weapon tightened. "Stay here," she whispered before slipping outside, disappearing into the fog. Velix wanted to call out, to stop her, but his body refused to obey. He was helpless, left alone in the shelter, vulnerable to whatever was lurking beyond. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then a gunshot. A single, sharp crack that echoed through the trees. Silence followed. Velix's heart pounded. Had she been ambushed? Had she turned against whoever or whatever was out there? He strained to listen, his mind racing through possibilities. If she was dead, he was doomed. If she had killed something, he needed to know what. And if she had been captured, was she truly his rescuer, or had she been the real threat all along? The sound of footsteps made his breath hitch. Heavy, deliberate steps, coming closer. The fog parted, and a figure emerged. It was Emily. Blood streaked her arm, but her expression was unreadable. In her free hand, she held something, a weapon that was not hers. She tossed it onto the ground beside him. A warning. A message. "They weren't animals," she said, her voice colder than before. "They were looking for you." Velix's stomach twisted. He wasn't the only one stranded here. Someone or something had been tracking him. And now, thanks to Emily, they knew he wasn't alone. The question was no longer about whether she was a rescuer or a threat. Now, the question was whether she had just saved him or doomed them both. Velix had spent his entire life studying biology, physiology, and survival mechanisms of countless species across the galaxy, but nothing could have prepared him for the terrifying reality of Earth. He had heard the stories, read the reports, seen the warning signs, DONOT, ENGAGE, DONOTLA and D, EARTHISADEATHWORLD. Yet, here he was, stranded on a planet where every living thing seemed designed to kill him. The predators hunted with an instinct so perfect it bordered on supernatural. The environment shifted unpredictably, turning from blistering heat to freezing cold in mere hours. Even the smallest organisms in the air were attacking his immune system, threatening to break him down on a microscopic level. And yet none of them were the true danger. None of them were the most lethal force on this planet. No. That title belonged to humans. Velix had always believed that intelligence and violence existed on opposite ends of the spectrum. A species that developed advanced technology would naturally evolve beyond the need for brutality. But the humans had defied every law of survival that he understood. They were not the strongest creatures on this world. They lacked claws, fangs, natural armor. They weren't the fastest, nor did they possess venom or stealth adaptations. By all logic, they should have been prey. Yet, they dominated. Not just here on their home planet, but across the galaxy. And now, as he sat in the dimly lit shelter, still recovering from the wounds and the fever that Earth had inflicted on him, he found himself face to face with a member of the species that ruled this planet, Dr. Emily Carter. She had saved his life, treated his injuries, protected him from threats he hadn't even seen. And yet, Velix could not shake the feeling of unease. The question lingered in his mind, was she truly a rescuer, or was she simply waiting to reveal the true nature of her kind? Emily moved with an ease that unsettled him. She had been injured in the last encounter, a wound on her arm still fresh, but she hardly reacted to it. He had watched as she cleaned the blood away, wrapping it tightly without even a flinch. A wound that would have left him incapacitated was nothing to her. Pain seemed irrelevant to humans, as if their bodies simply refused to acknowledge it. That was not normal. No species should be able to endure suffering like that. And yet, they did. Outside, the world remained restless. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the distant roars of creatures that should not exist. The ground itself seemed to pulse with life, filled with burrowing, crawling things that moved beneath the surface, unseen but always present. But none of it terrified him as much as the woman sitting across from him, casually sharpening a blade as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You're still staring at me like I'm going to eat you," Emily said without looking up. There was amusement in her tone, but there was something else too, something unreadable. Felix stiffened. "Your species has a reputation," he said carefully. She smirked. "Good or bad?" He hesitated. "Both." She stopped sharpening the knife, her sharp eyes locking onto him. "And what do you think?" Velix swallowed. He had no answer. The stories of human wars, their ability to survive against impossible odds, their brutal history, it all painted a picture of a species that should not exist. Civilizations were meant to collapse under their own aggression, yet humanity had only grown stronger. They didn't just survive hardship. They thrived in it. "You killed them," he said finally. "The ones who were tracking me." "You didn't hesitate." Emily shrugged. "They were armed. They would have done worse to you. Maybe to me too, but you acted first." Her expression didn't change. "That's how we survive here." That was what unsettled him the most. It wasn't just that humans could fight. It was that they expected to. They lived every day knowing they might have to kill. To endure. To push forward, no matter what stood in their way. They weren't like other sentient species who sought peace and stability. They had built their entire civilization in defiance of nature itself. Every other intelligent race Felix had encountered had adapted to their worlds, molding their society around their planet's conditions. But humans? They changed the planet to suit them. And when they left Earth, they did the same to the galaxy. Velix exhaled slowly, choosing his next words carefully. "Are there many like you?" Emily gave him a strange look. "Like me? Capable of what you do. Surviving. Fighting. Enduring." She chuckled, shaking her head. "You don't get it, do you?" She leaned forward slightly, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "It's not some of us. It's all of us. Every human, no matter where they come from, no matter how peaceful they look if they're alive, it means they fought to be. Maybe not with weapons, maybe not in wars, but in some way, every single one of us has stared at the impossible and said, 'I'm not dying today.' That's why we're still here. That's why we'll always be here." A chill ran through Velix that had nothing to do with his fever. This was the true danger of humans. It wasn't their weapons, their technology, or their aggression. It was their refusal to break. The galaxy had seen empires rise and fall, civilizations collapse under their own weight, but humans? They didn't fall. They didn't accept fate. They fought. And they won. Velix had come to Earth, believing it to be the deadliest world in the universe. But now, as he stared into the eyes of the woman who had killed to protect him, who had suffered injuries without hesitation, who spoke of survival as if it was as natural as breathing, he realized he had been wrong. Earth wasn't the true danger. The humans were. Felix could barely move. Every muscle in his body ached, his skin burned from exposure, and his lungs struggled to take in the heavy, oxygen-rich air of Earth. He had thought he was prepared. He had studied the warnings, memorized every detail about this death world, analyzed every possible way to survive. But knowledge meant nothing when the land itself was against him. The jungle stretched endlessly around him, thick and suffocating, filled with unseen predators that moved between the trees, always watching, always waiting. He had learned to fear them, but nothing terrified him more than the human walking ahead of him. Dr. Emily Carter moved with an ease that unsettled him. She carried her rifle strapped to her back, a knife secured at her hip, and an expression that revealed nothing. She had been guiding him through this nightmare, ensuring his survival after his crash, but she had made one thing clear from the beginning: if he wanted to live, he would have to learn. Humans did not survive by luck. They did not rely on instincts alone. They adapted, they calculated, and above all, they refused to surrender. It was a lesson Velix had been slow to understand, but Earth had forced him to learn the hard way. A rustling in the undergrowth made him freeze. His pulse quickened, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the trees. Something was there. He could feel it. The air had shifted, the sounds of insects had gone silent, and an unnatural stillness had settled over the jungle. He turned to Emily, expecting her to raise her weapon, to prepare for battle. But instead, she simply crouched down, motioning for him to do the same. "Don't run," she whispered. "Running makes you prey." Velix swallowed hard. His instincts screamed at him to flee, to put as much distance as possible between himself and whatever was lurking in the shadows. But he forced himself to obey, lowering himself slowly, his body tense with fear. The creature was close now, its heavy breathing barely audible in the thick air. He could see its outline through the trees, a massive, hulking beast, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Then, in an instant, it moved. The predator lunged, crashing through the foliage with terrifying speed. Velix barely had time to react before Emily was already in motion. She didn't hesitate. She didn't panic. She acted. In one swift movement, she raised her rifle and fired, the shot echoing through the jungle. The beast staggered, letting out a deep, guttural snarl, but it didn't stop. It charged again. Emily shouted. Velix scrambled backward, his heart pounding as he stumbled over the uneven terrain. Emily fired again, this time aiming lower, striking the creature's leg. It roared in pain, slowing just enough for her to grab Velix's arm and pull him to his feet. "Go," she commanded, and this time he didn't question her. They ran. Not in blind panic, not without purpose, but as hunters, not prey. Emily led him through the dense jungle, her movements precise, controlled. She wasn't running for her life. She was choosing the battlefield. Within seconds, they reached a narrow path bordered by thick, gnarled trees. Emily pressed herself against one, her breath steady despite the chaos. "Listen to me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "That thing is bigger, stronger, faster. But it's also reckless. It thinks we're running scared. We use that against it." Velix couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You want to fight it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She gave him a sharp look. "You don't survive on Earth by running. You survive by ending the threat." The creature's heavy footsteps grew louder, crashing through the undergrowth as it closed in on them. Velix's breathing was ragged, his mind racing through every survival scenario he had ever studied. None of them had prepared him for this. But Emily had already decided. She knelt, grabbing a sharp fragment of rock from the ground, and handed it to him. "Take this," she said. Felix hesitated. "What am I supposed to do with a rock?" Emily smirked. "Survive." Before he could question her further, the beast lunged into the clearing, its massive form illuminated by the pale light filtering through the canopy. It was unlike anything Velix had ever seen, its thick, matted fur bristling with rage, its claws sinking into the dirt as it prepared to strike. But Emily didn't give it the chance. She moved first. She dodged left, drawing the creature's attention, forcing it to turn. That was when Velix saw the opening she had created, the beast's exposed side. He didn't have time to think. He acted. He gripped the rock tightly and drove it into the creature's wounded leg with all the strength he had left. The beast howled in agony, stumbling as its injured limb gave out beneath it. Emily didn't waste the opportunity. In one final, precise movement, she raised her knife and drove it deep into the creature's throat. The struggle ended instantly. For a long moment, there was only silence. Velix stared at the fallen predator, his chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. His hands trembled, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had fought. He had survived. Emily wiped her blade clean and turned to him, a small, satisfied smile on her face. "Not bad for your first time." Velix looked at her, realization sinking in. "You planned this," he said, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "You knew it would chase us. You knew how to beat it." She shrugged. "Every creature has weaknesses. The trick is finding them before they find yours." Velix exhaled, feeling the weight of the lesson settle over him. He had always believed that survival was about strength, about avoiding danger. But humans had shown him something different. Survival wasn't just about endurance, it was about strategy. It was about fighting when running wasn't an option. It was about knowing when to strike. For the first time since crashing onto this unforgiving planet, Velix understood why humans ruled this death world. And more than that, he realized that if he wanted to make it out alive, he had to start thinking like one.